All right, so listen to this. A brand new poll from Rasmussen Reports just came out, and it has some pretty surprising insights about Pennsylvania voters.
Surprising.
Yeah. And we all know Pennsylvania is a key swing state, so this data is really fascinating.
Absolutely. And they polled something like 1,100 likely voters.
Okay.
And they used this unique methodology where they weighted it
Interesting.
to reflect the actual voter turnout from 2020.
So they really tried to hone in on who actually voted in the last election.
Yeah.
Instead of just asking like, hey, who are you going to vote for this time?
Exactly. It tries to take into account any overrepresentation or underrepresentation of certain voter groups.
So what really stood out to us was this swing towards Trump since September.
Definitely.
But before we even get into those numbers, I want to talk about what issues are most important to Pennsylvania voters.
Okay.
So what do you think it is?
Let me guess.
Is it abortion?
I don't think so.
You're right on the money. It's not abortion, even though some media outlets might have you believe that.
Yeah. Interesting.
The top two issues are actually the economy
Okay.
and border security.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Together, those represent a combined 54% of voter concerns.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. And the economy alone grabs that top spot at 33%, followed by border security.
Okay.
And abortion, only 17% of those polled listed it as their primary concern.
Yeah. You know, what's really interesting, we're seeing this all over the country, actually, when people are concerned about their finances. Those economic concerns kind of overshadow everything else.
It's like that old saying, it's the economy.
Exactly. And it's really interesting how that can even overshadow issues that are really important to certain demographics. But when the pocketbook is hurting,
Yeah,
that takes center stage.
it's true. And here's where I think things get even more interesting. The media you consume seems to play a role in what issues you think are the most important.
Oh, that's so interesting.
For instance, among CNN viewers, 25% list abortion as their top concern, compared to 36% who name the economy.
Huh.
But then you flip over to MSNBC and those numbers practically reverse.
Wow.
Yeah, for MSNBC viewers, 32% are focused on abortion and only 18% on the economy.
Interesting.
And for those who primarily watch Fox News and Newsmax,
Yeah.
it's overwhelmingly border security and the economy
Wow.
that dominate their concerns.
So the media we consume really does affect how we see the world.
It really does. It's like everyone's living in their own little bubble.
It really does underscore the importance of seeking out diverse viewpoints,
Yeah.
and not just staying in that echo chamber.
Really, really important.
Yeah.
Now, before we get into how people are feeling about specific candidates,
Okay.
there's another interesting finding that I wanted to share. Most Pennsylvanians
Yeah.
aren't single-issue voters.
Really, only 5% said they would make their decision based on one issue alone.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
It is. It really suggests that for any campaign to truly resonate with voters,
Yeah.
they need to address a variety of concerns, not just hammer away at a single point.
That's a good point. It's about the bigger picture.
Absolutely. It's
Right.
complex. So are you ready to dig into these candidate numbers?
I am. Let's do it.
Okay, because this is where that 3-point swing since September really comes into play.
Okay.
In this latest poll, Trump is at 50%.
Wow.
I know he's drawing strong support from men, white voters, and even independents, which is surprising.
That is interesting. That crossover appeal with independents suggests that there could be a realignment happening within the electorate.
It's definitely something to watch. And when you consider that voters who feel they're worse off than they were 4 years ago are leaning towards Trump,
Yeah.
that economic anxiety that we talked about
Right.
seems to be a powerful motivator.
It really does seem to be a key factor. And
Yeah.
it's fascinating to see the religious breakdown of the data as well.
Oh, yeah. How does that look?
Well, Trump is leading with evangelical Christians.
Okay. That's not surprising.
Right. But he has weaker support among Jewish and Muslim voters.
Which just goes to show that you can't make assumptions about any voting bloc,
Exactly.
even those that are often grouped together.
Absolutely. There's a lot of diversity of thought and opinion within every group.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So we've got Trump polling at 50%. Where does that leave everyone else?
Well, according to this poll, Kamala Harris is trailing at 47%.
Okay, so it's close.
It's a tight race, for sure.
It is, but these numbers are just a snapshot in time, and things can change really quickly in politics,
Absolutely.
especially in this day and age.
Especially.
And there's another layer to this that I think ties into those numbers.
Okay, what is it?
A significant 75% of Pennsylvanians believe the country is headed in the wrong direction.
Wow, that's a lot.
I know, and that they want some major changes.
Yeah.
And I think this sentiment is directly connected to those economic concerns
Right.
and that yearning for change that we talked about.
It makes sense.
And to add to that, 69% of Pennsylvanians say they just don't trust the federal government.
That's a pretty high level of distrust.
It is, and I think it speaks to a sense of disillusionment with the status quo.
Absolutely, and that creates a very unpredictable situation.
Yeah, a volatile political landscape
Exactly, where anything could happen.
where people are looking for someone to come in and shake things up.
It's fertile ground for candidates who position themselves as outsiders or, agents of change.
Exactly. And here's one more thing to think about. A whopping 70% of Pennsylvania voters are worried about the election being affected by cheating.
Wow, 70%, that's huge.
It's a really substantial concern. It makes you wonder how that's going to impact things moving forward.
Definitely. I think it reflects a broader trend of people losing trust in institutions, including the electoral process.
It's a little bit unnerving.
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on. It really is kind of unsettling when you think about it.
Yeah, it's like this perfect storm brewing, right?
Yeah.
You've got this economic unease that's fueling a desire for change and that makes people more susceptible to messages about a rigged system. And then you layer on top of that this deep distrust in the government and the media.
Yeah, it's like a breeding ground for misinformation,
Uh-huh.
and it just deepens those existing divides.
Totally. And then the lack of faith in the electoral process itself can have real consequences for voter turnout.
Exactly, because if people start believing that the system is rigged against them, why would they even bother to participate?
That's a scary thought in a democracy,
It is.
where every voice and every vote matters. So we've talked about the concerns, the anxieties, the potential for things to really go off the rails.
Yeah.
But what does this all mean for us?
Yeah.
How do we, as engaged citizens, navigate this very, very complex landscape?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's tough, but I think it starts with awareness. We have to understand that these issues are really complex.
For sure.
And we have to resist those simplistic explanations, or those partisan narratives that we see so much of.
Yeah.
Because there's never just one answer that solves everything.
So be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Be critical of the information that you encounter.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone.
Get out of that echo chamber.
Exactly. Expose yourself to different points of view. Have those tough conversations, even if and maybe especially when you disagree with someone.
Sometimes those are the most important conversations to have, right?
Absolutely. You never know what you might learn.
You might even change your mind.
Exactly. So be informed, be critical, be open-minded.
I love it. Okay, so remember those generic ballot numbers that we were talking about earlier?
No, the ones where it seemed like the Republicans had a 3-point advantage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, get this. The poll also took a look at the Senate race in Pennsylvania,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
and it tells a completely different story.
Okay.
Turns out Democrat Bob Casey Jr. is actually leading Republican David McCormick by 2 points.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Isn't it? It just goes to show that you can't always rely on national trends
Yeah.
or even statewide trends
Right.
to understand what's happening on the ground.
Exactly. Each race has its own unique factors at play.
It really does. And it all influences how people vote.
Absolutely, local issues matter.
Totally.
The candidates themselves, their personalities,
Yeah.
campaign strategies.
It's all important.
Yeah.
It just goes to show how complex voter behavior really is.
It really is. It's not always about party lines or a single issue like we talked about.
Definitely not.
Really.
So I guess the big takeaway here is don't jump to conclusions.
Exactly.
Just because one party seems to have momentum
right.
doesn't mean they're going to win every race.
Pennsylvania's always a nail-biter.
Always.
Yeah,
It looks like it's going to be a very tight race all the way to November.
for sure.
Okay,
Oh.
so before we get completely sidetracked by the Senate race,
Yeah.
let's zoom back out to the bigger picture.
Okay.
We've got this volatile political climate, this deep-seated anxiety, and a whole lot of uncertainty swirling around.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It really is.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? What should we be paying attention to as we get closer to the 2024 election?
Well, I think one of the most important things to watch is how candidates address all of these anxieties that we've been talking about. I think one of the most important things to watch is how candidates address all of these anxieties that we've been talking about. Are they going to try to exploit those fears and insecurities, to gain political points?
That's a good question.
Or are they going to try to offer real solutions
Yeah.
that resonate with voters on both sides of the aisle?
Because it's not just about what their policies are, right?
Exactly.
It's also about how they talk about them,
Yes.
how they connect with people
Absolutely.
on a human level.
Voters want to see authenticity.
Totally.
They want someone who understands what they're going through.
They want someone who gets it,
Yes, and someone who can offer a real path forward.
which is really tough to do in this current political climate
It is.
because it feels so incredibly divisive.
Yeah, it's a tough balance to strike, but I think it's really crucial. We need leaders who can appeal to our shared values
Yeah.
and our shared aspirations. Someone who can actually bring people together.
Instead of driving us further apart.
Exactly.
Because I feel like we're more divided than ever.
I agree.
It's almost like we need someone who can help us believe in the system again.
That's a really powerful way to put it. And it's not just about the presidency either. It's about every level of government, from your local officials,
Your city council members.
all the way up to members of Congress.
We need to start rebuilding trust at every level,
Absolutely.
which is a tall order.
It is. It really is.
But I think it's essential right now.
It is. And it's not just about the leaders either. We as citizens,
We have to do our part.
we have a responsibility to foster a healthier political environment.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, I mean,
Besides, staying informed and being critical of the information we encounter
right.
and seeking out different perspectives.
Yes, all of that is important, but I think it also starts with how we talk to each other.
So be nicer on Twitter.
Basically, we need to have respectful dialogue even when we disagree.
Even when we really disagree.
Especially when we disagree. We need to really listen to each other and try to understand where the other person is coming from.
Like building bridges instead of walls.
Exactly. And we have to hold our leaders accountable.
Yes.
Not just for their policies, but for the way they talk about things.
The rhetoric.
Exactly.
Or
And
their conduct.
so no more name calling.
Right, it's about being better examples.
So it's a group effort then.
It really is.
So we have a lot of work to do.
We do, both individually and together.
But I do think people are starting to realize that something needs to change.
I think so too.
There's a growing awareness
Yeah, I think people are realizing that this isn't sustainable.
and that we can do better.
We can. We really can.
We need a political system that actually works for everyone
Exactly.
and is more representative
Yeah.
and more responsive.
Absolutely.
It's not a lot to ask for, is it?
I know, right? But maybe, just maybe, this desire for change for something better
Yeah.
can be the catalyst we need.
The thing that finally gets us moving in the right direction.
I hope so.
I do too. And on that note,
What note is that?
we'll leave you with this.
Okay.
How do you think these concerns about election integrity
Right.
might actually impact voter turnout in 2024?
Interesting.
It's something to think about.
It really is. Until our next deep dive.